too young to be talking like this. Yo, what's good? Peace. What's today's Supreme Mathematics? Today's Supreme Mathematics is build or destroy. Happy born day to my sister Kamisha. I didn't put it on the book yet, but hopefully she'll hear this live and see that I shouted it out. And to all of you listening, please share. Just give love this year, man. It's all about us working collectively, man, in the spirit of Ujima year round. Unity, unity, unity. You heard what Queen said. Anyway, today I present to you another rendition of the Reading Cipher. Today we're going to begin talking about its time. It's about time, pardon self. And we'll try to finish this so we can get into chapter 2 on the next go round. Shout out to Shango, my boy. If you haven't heard of Kemetflix or you're into, a higher level of consciousness, I strongly urge you to go to www.kmtflix.com. $5 subscription, black owned. You helping a lot of people out by supporting and just grabbing a $5 subscription. We can play for Netflix, but we got our own array of information that we should be passing on from generation to generation. And I'm sure even if you're astute with what's going on in today's world, we got elders. I'm talking vintage footage of elders giving it up in rare form. So check it out, www.kmtflix.com. And I'm going to go ahead and get into this today. It's about time. Those who have traveled through Europe know of Germany's reputation for extraordinary exactitude. If the bus schedule says, I think I read this yesterday. Okay. I believe I read that. I'm not sure. I don't remember where I left off. But I'll continue from where it was. Hopefully, it'll be all right. If the bus schedule says the bus to Berlin leaves at 8:03, that is exactly what it will leave, not 8:02 or 8:04, but 8:03 on the nose. Of course, in Africa, things are usually quite different. I'm positive I read this. Underlying African behavior is a view of time as being flexible and plentiful. From the African perspective, time serves the relationships among people. Hence, meetings like the one I attended in Lesotho. Many gatherings in Africa tend to have indefinite starting times as well as an indefinite completion times. Okay, we read that. For some cultures, time is something to be parsed. So I must have got into learning about the world. That's where we're going to start today. My apologies. How do we come to learn about our world? We come to understand our world through many means. We use reasoning, observation, and calculation. We use our five senses and our intuition. We use symbolic imagery through stories and analogies. We use all of these and more. In order to more fully understand ourselves, we need to be aware of how each of these is emphasized in African culture. Africans and their descendants created great dynasties and empires, constructed pyramids, and founded medical disciplines such as pharmacology, surgery, and the study of anatomy. All these accomplishments necessitated considerable use of objective calculations. They also learned much through subjective approaches that rely more on intuition and natural feeling. For example, a common way of describing an event might include statements like, I was picking up something going on in the meeting, or there were some heavy vibes in the room, or I wasn't feeling him or her. These statements reflect a group tendency to place high value on internal barometers. It is not surprising that people whose primary concern is their relationship with others would evolve such an emphasis. And it is this emphasis that lay at the heart of the African tradition of transmitting knowledge and wisdom through what Nichols describes as symbolic imagery. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, from the African's perspective, the lessons that can be learned from stories and analogies are worth 1,000 pictures. Throughout Africa, storytellers hold an esteemed place in the community. They are the repositories of knowledge. They are the teachers. They pass down their wisdom through stories, their symbolic imagery of their life experience. This oral tradition has been passed along and is evident in African American culture today. The importance of learning through symbolic imagery cannot be stressed enough. Today, in schools across the country, our children are presented with the subject matter that is of little interest to them. This is primarily because our students view their schoolwork as seemingly unconnected to their lives, having little significance in their ultimate success or survival. Thus, the frequent question that comes from African American students, regardless of their age, in response to a teacher's requirement for what their class is inevitably, why? Why are we learning this? Meaning, what does this have to do with my world or reality? When our students do not see the connection between the subject at hand and their lives, they tend to become bored and unmotivated. Conversely, they will become highly motivated and excited about learning when they do see the connections. It is through symbolic imagery that these connections can be made apparent. Years ago, I was teaching at a middle school. While my sixth grade students were filing into my classroom, four white gentlemen also entered. Each carried a clipboard and a pen, and they seated themselves in the last row. At first, I didn't pay too much attention to them as I was busy greeting each of the children as they came in. Only when all the students were seated did I query my unexpected guest about the purpose of their visit. One of them quickly explained, pardon, one of them quickly explained that they were visiting various programs in the area that offered curricula about school and drugs to determine which programs their foundation would fund. They assured me they would not be a source of interruption and encouraged me to carry on as I normally would. I decided to give them a copy of my pre and post test on amphetamines and barbiturates, which was the subject of the week's curriculum. As I turned to walk away, I noticed some chuckling coming from several of them. I overheard one of them ask another if he knew the answer to one of the test questions. I found out later they were not able to answer many of the 20 questions on my test. I then heard one of them mumble something about doubting that my students could pass the test. That was the last straw. I turned to them and stated that I had no doubt whatsoever that my students, mainly consisting of hormone raging boys labeled as disruptive and low achieving, would pass the test with flying colors. What resulted has been affectionately referred to by past students as the story of Byron. I started off by explaining to my class that I was going to be sharing a unit on drugs, amphetamines, and barbiturates, and asked them to repeat after me. A, amphetamines take you to the top, and B, barbiturates take you to the bottom. A, amphetamines take you to the top, and B, barbiturates take you to the bottom. They repeated enthusiastically. Oh, I can't do nothing with you right now. Interfere. I can't do it right now. Pardon me. Was interrupted for a moment. Okay. I'm about to get right back on. I just had to share this thing right quick. What's that noise? Oh, echo. Pardon. Sorry about that. I think that was my phone having playback. I asked my students, is it safe to assume that an amphetamine had the opposite effect of a barbiturate? Yes, they answered. This would be the only reference that would be made that day in the way of specifics about the two drugs. I then began to tell a story about a real life event that occurred when I was a child growing up on 63rd and Brynhurst, 2 blocks west of Crenshaw Boulevard in South Central Los Angeles. I asked my students if they know of anyone who lived in the neighborhood who acted a little strange, someone who maybe talked to themselves or yelled or screamed at people for no apparent reason. They all commented that they knew and heard about such people. I explained that I was going to tell them about someone who lived in my neighborhood whom everyone knew because she was always doing something strange. Her name was Barbara. In addition to having mental challenges, Barbara was addicted to drugs. Which drug might you think Barbara was addicted to? Barbiturates, they yelled out. Yes, I responded. It just so happened Barbara was addicted to barbiturates. I began my story. When I was 10 or 11 years old, a bunch of us kids were playing kick in the middle of the street. What were you kicking a can for? A couple of students asked. The question was a clear sign that I was aging. I took a moment to explain that it was just a different version of hide and seek, only with a can. They seemed satisfied with the answer, and I continued the story. It was getting toward evening, and as we were playing, we saw Barbara at the corner walking toward us. She was muttering and swearing as she usually did, only today she was carrying a large hammer, the kind with the big claw on one side and the hammerhead on the other. We all stopped to watch her because we knew Barbara could be unpredictable and aggressive. Parked directly in front of where we were, Parked in front of directly where we were playing was a brand new Cadillac, replete with gleaming chrome, leather bucket seats, and a miniature steering wheel called a donut, which was quite popular back then. We watched as Barbara took her hammer and broke every window, the windshield, the headlights, and the taillights. Barbara then climbed on top of the car and continued pounding on the hood. When she was satisfied with her work, she got off the car, walked over to the apartment where the owner of the car lived, and proceeded to break every window she could reach. When she'd finished, she sat on the trunk of the car, mumbling and swearing. We all stood perfectly still as if we were in a scene from the West Side Story. We had watched in total shock as Barbara pretty much demolished the car of a neighbor who was soon to return from work. It seemed like only moments passed before we saw him turn to the corner. Before we saw him turn the corner. He wore black rimmed glasses, black work pants, and a black work shirt. He was carrying the remains of his lunch in a rolled up paper bag. As he approached, Barbara, still sitting on the car trunk, began yelling profanities and spitting wildly. The man walked slowly around the car as if inspecting the damage, all the while ignoring Barbara. He then turned toward his apartment, stepping carefully around the broken glass from his apartment windows. When he went inside, we all began to run for cover. In the hood, when someone goes into their home in a situation like this, they are very likely to come out with some kind of weapon. We all scattered like birds, hiding behind cars, trees, anything we could find. It was now dark. The single street light on our block had come on, but we were all too terrified to run home. I was hiding behind a large bush that was closest to the scene. Sure enough, when the man returned, he grabbed Barbara off of his car and began beating her severely. The whispers of the hiding children could be heard coming from every direction. Barbara really went and did it this time. Boy, she is getting her butt kicked now. But I was silent because I could see what the rest of my young companions could not. I could see that the man was not hitting Barbara. He was stabbing her. I began to shake uncontrollably. My heart felt as though it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I didn't know whether to stay hidden or to try to run home because I was afraid he would see me and hurt me too. In a flash, I began running as fast as I could. It was 3 blocks to my house. I didn't look back. I kept running. I jumped clear over the steps of my house onto the porch and into the house screaming for my mother. When I reached her, I was out of breath, panicked, and sweating. My mother saw the terror in my eyes and feared the worst. I finally got out a garbled message. Mama, I saw Barbara, broke the man's car. He stabbed and he stabbed her. My mother immediately called the paramedics. They and the police finally arrived 30 minutes later. I stopped the story at this point and asked my students. It took the paramedics 30 minutes to get there. What do you fear for Barbara? My students, now sitting on the edges of their seats, fully engaged and focused, utterly said, Barbara must be dead. Why would Barbara have died? I asked. Because she would have bled to death from being stabbed, several students answered. I continued. When the police and paramedics came, I took them back to where I last saw her. She was gone. All the police could see in the beam of their flashlights was blood. Suddenly, a porch light went out across the street. We heard a car door slam, followed by shrieks of tires as it sped away. The police officers ran toward the house, shining flashlights everywhere. And there, lying on the porch, was Barbara. She had apparently crawled up on the porch looking for help. Now my students could not hold back. They started asking almost in unison, was Barbara dead? Did she die? Not only was Barbara alive, she began swearing at the police for shining the light in her eyes and yelling at the paramedics who were feverishly trying to stop the flow of blood from her gaping wounds. Why didn't Barbara bleed to death? I asked. The students immediately started yelling out it was because of the drugs Barbara took, the barbiturates. And what do you think the drugs did? The drugs must have slowed her heart down. Exactly right. So why wasn't Barbara screaming out in pain? Now confident of their answers, they shouted, because the barbiturates must stop pain. You were right again. I then conducted a short impromptu quiz. Amphetamines decrease the heart rate. True or false? False, the students yelled out. Barbiturates increase a person's ability to endure pain. True, they shouted. After about a dozen or so questions, all of which the students knew the answers to, it was time to complete class. Before they left, I ended the story by sharing that while Barbara survived the ordeal, she remained in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. So you will never forget what barbiturates do to the body because you will never forget whom. And my students, along with my guests, answered Barbara. After dismissing my enthusiastic and eager to learn sixth graders, I explained to my guests that this lesson was an example of how to teach children using symbolic imagery. I shared with them that if I had begun the class with the typical format, handing out a paper with a picture of an amphetamine and a barbiturate on it, which described the various properties of the drugs, together with a list of study questions at the end, that piece of paper would have more likely been used as a paper airplane than a study guide. However, if I bring that same paper in tomorrow, my students will respond enthusiastically because the contents of the paper will have value and meaning to them. Treating relationships as preeminent, attuning themselves to temporal rhythms, emphasizing learning through subjective barometers and symbolic imagery, these are the core of African American culture. We feel them and know them to be true. Our mission is to integrate them and learn how to use them to our advantage in the worlds in which we find ourselves. It is not surprising that a culture that places primary concern in people's relationship with each other would evolve learning strategies that place great emphasis on internal orientations and symbolic imagery, especially when it comes to interactions with other people. To be sure, both subjective and objective strategies are important if we are to fully understand our world. Difficulties can arise. However, when objective means are used as the primary method of understanding people, or when more internal means are similarly applied to working with the material world. When a culture becomes overly concerned with the relationship to their material world, even people can become objectified. Individuals can grow to be viewed as cogs in a great machine and as such expendable. In extreme cases, this can lead to horrific results, such as when accountants at Ford Motor Company recommended that Ford not recall and repair the faulty gas tanks in one of their cars, the Ford Pencil in one of their light trucks. These accountants concluded that it would cost less to pay off the lawsuits resulting from death and injury than it would cost to fix the problem. Ford's executives followed their recommendation in 1977. Mark Dowie, writing for Mother Jones magazine, broke the story. In his article, he released the following from an internal calculation from Ford depicting the math they used to make their case. Ford conducted that it would cost $49.5 million to pay the victims of the burn deaths and injuries that will likely occur as a result of not fixing their design flaw, considerably less than the $137 million it would have cost them to fix the flaw. This would save Ford $87.5 million. Through this actuarial analysis, though this actuarial analysis was correct, mathematically speaking, it proved to be incomplete and quite short-sighted. It failed to take into account the positive effect that recalling and repairing their cars would have on the Ford automobile owners and potential buyers. In addition to saving lives, recalling and repairing their cars would certainly have added to the public's respect for and confidence in Ford Motor Company. Of course, factors like consumer respect and confidence, though no less important and perhaps more important than dollars and cents, are more difficult to reduce numbers. As it was, When Ford's actions were brought to light, they eventually had to fix their mistakes and ended up looking very bad in the process. In the grand scheme of things, Ford's actions might seem relatively inconsequential, except to those who were needlessly burned or killed in one of their cars. When material gain becomes the God before which all must be sacrificed, even one's own humanity, all manner of crimes and pursuant justifications become possible. And when crimes become heinous enough, as in wars of aggression, genocide, and enslavement, the perpetrators have little choice but to dehumanize their victims. That's the reading for today. I hope your today is great and your tomorrow is greater. May fortune favor you. Peace. Oh, www.kmtflix.com. Get your subscription. You won't be disappointed.